Welcome to the St. Joe's Video History Series. In this series, we are interviewing parishioners, both current and former, who would like to share with us their stories about the parish history. Our guest today is being interviewed via Zoom from Edmonton, Alberta. It is with great pleasure that I welcome the Honorable Douglas Roach, QC, to this interview today. For those of you who may not know him, the Honorable Douglas Roach was a senator, a member of Parliament, Canadian ambassador for disarmament, and visiting professor at the University of Alberta. He has received 9 honorary doctorates, numerous awards and recognitions for his work for peace and nonviolence. And he is an officer of the Order of Canada. And I should note that he still remains active in 2022, writing articles for newspapers, especially the Hill Times, AKA the parliamentary newspaper. Thank you, Doug, for your many, many contributions to our country and to peace and nonviolence in our world. Now, let's go back in time. Doug, would you share with us how you came about attending St. Joe's Parish?
Well, Terry, thank you very much indeed for your kind words and bringing us together in this modern technological age that we didn't have any idea about in the time period that we're now going to discuss, which is early 1930s. So we're not too far from 100 years from that period. I'm going to be 93 in a few weeks. And so my mind is now being transported back in this very quick juxtaposition. I've been working on nuclear weapons issues here the last hour, and it's a very modern phenomenon. And now I have to take my mind back to a period that was peaceful, more peaceful to be sure, but nonetheless had its own problems and challenges of that time. And of course, a cornerstone of my life was St. Joseph Church. It was my second home. I lived right around the corner from St. Joseph Church. St. Joseph is located at the corner of Laurier and Cumberland. And I lived on Hasty Avenue, which is 1 block away. Hasty Avenue doesn't exist today. It's part of the campus of the University of Ottawa. But I was only a block away when I became an altar boy about the age of 6. So we're talking about the beginning, I would say, about 1935. That's when my memories start of St. Joseph Church.
And being an altar boy, was that the only ministry you were involved in back then? I'm
sorry?
Being an altar boy, was
yes.
that was the only ministry you were involved in?
Yes, I was an altar boy and grew up as an altar boy. And I like to tell, I've told my children in later years that I was the head altar boy. Whether that is perfectly true or not, maybe it's a fiction in my own mind. But St. Joseph's Church was an essential and integral part of my life and the life of my family. And I know I well remember I served the 6:30 a.m. mass. They had in those days they had sequential masses in the weekday mornings, and for some reason I was chosen, appointed to serve at 6:30. So I'd get up at 6 o'clock in the morning and throw my clothes on and run over to St. Joseph's. So I have very strong memories of that, and particularly the special occasions, such as Christmas and Easter, and the midnight mass was sort of a dramatic event in those days. They would turn the lights off in the church and have no electric lights on, and just have candles. Everybody had a candle, so the warmth of the setting increased the drama of the midnight mass, and so I have very, very strong, vivid memories of those occasions. And of course, I would not want your viewers to think, Terry, that I spent all my time on the altar at St. Joseph's Church. I mean, one of the attractions as I got a little bit older was the tennis courts beside the church. They had the 7 tennis courts at St. Joseph's Tennis Club. And I certainly spent a lot of my youth growing up, and especially when I became an early teenager, on the courts. But that was a community. It was a community for us in both the church and the social activities of the church, and then the tennis club and the people I knew. And I mean, that was my world. It was as I look back on it, of course, and I've written this in my memoirs, that I grew up in a very parochial atmosphere. And when I use the word parochial, I do not mean it in a prejudicial way. It was close, and we were close to one another, and close to the priests, and so that it was a world. And we might discuss in this talk we're having my breakout from that world, but from the earliest years, that was St. Joseph's was laid the foundation. The formative years, it was a foundation on which I then began to grow.
Good. Now, Doug, were you ever involved in the plays that they produced at St. Joe's Hall?
Yes, I would like to say that my theatrical career began and ended on one night, and they had the Christmas pageant. I was a toy soldier, and whatever it was I was supposed to be carrying, I dropped in front of the audience. So I think my theatrical career was detoured very, very quickly. But we had a lot of pageants, and it was all part of the fun, I think, of being together.
Doug, when I interviewed your older sister, Marion Kieran's, she conveyed to me a lot of respect and love she has toward you. And she still recalls how proud she was seeing you as an altar boy at St. Joe.
Yeah, well, Marion is very sweet, and my heart belongs to Marion. There's no doubt about that. And we were very close when we were growing up, although we lived apart for family circumstances. Marion actually lived in Montreal, but would come to Ottawa often.
Yeah.
And so we've retained that close bond between us. If anything, it's even closer. And now, as we get into our final years, Marion is 18 months older than I am, and we cherish the time that we have together.
Good. Now, there was a Father Archie Daly. He's related to you?
Yes, legally he was my cousin, but we were brought up as brothers. My mother died when I was just an infant, and my father sent me to Ottawa to be brought up by Marion and Jim Daly, who lived on Hasty Avenue. And my two sisters, Marion and my other sister Agnes, went into a convent, and were brought up in a convent in Montreal. But Archie Daly was the son of Marion and Archie Daly, and he became an oblate priest. He was 6 years older than me, but he became an oblate priest and had his own career, and he died at the age of 92. He died in 2015 at the age of 92. So again, Archie and I were very close. He also was an altar boy. Because when I started being an altar boy at the age of 6, so he was 12, and certainly a senior altar boy. I looked up to him, but I looked up to him all my life. He was a wonderful, wonderful man.
Did he ever try to convince you to become a priest?
Oh, I don't think he did. I thought about it, but he married me on my first marriage to Eva Nolan in 1953 when I got married. But so Archie and I stayed very close through the years, and he was a great credit to St. Joseph Church.
You know, Doug, I interviewed Archie way back in 2006, and he recounted a story to me that he said when he was a youngster, a priest came up to him and said, "Now, Archie, have you ever considered becoming a priest?" And Archie looked at him and said, "Father, there's no money in that." Amazing how things changed.
Well, there's that. There may not be any cash, but there's a heavenly reward awaiting.
Doug, did you ever attend any of our parish schools?
St. Joseph's School on College Street. College Street doesn't exist anymore either. I think it's also part of the complex of the University of Ottawa. But I went to St. Joseph's School from grade 1 to grade 8. And I had some teachers, and it's funny you mentioned that, because in my memoirs, I recalled the names of some of the teachers who that their names stayed vivid in my mind all through the years. Florence Mulvihill in grade 1, and Genevieve Quinn in grade 2, and Bill O'Mara in grade 7, Gabriel Burke in grade 8. And Bill O'Mara taught me English, and he taught me to write, to spell, to speak. And I owe my facility as a journalist, which I became in the first stages of my professional life. I was a journalist for quite a number of years, and my grounding in English came from Bill O'Mara at St. Joseph's School, and I remember those classes very well, even to today. So I owe Bill O'Mara and the other teachers there too a lot for what they did to form me as an individual with a spiritual base and the ability to speak English in a decent manner.
Mm-hmm. Good. Yeah, it's something I'm trying to build up on, is our information regarding this parish schools, because currently most of the parishioners who go to St. Joe's aren't familiar with them. So I want to bring that history back to their attention and recall some of the times that were occurring back then.
Well, I mean, I wouldn't say everything was perfect, but as I look back, I mean, there was perhaps a bit too narrow in the church and the school and their outlook, but that was the times, I mean, the English and French didn't get along, and you had Sacred Heart Church, Sacré-Cœur, directly across the street, also run by the Oblates, and it was like they lived on two different planets. You know, there was no connection at all between the French-speaking Canadians who went to Sacré-Cœur and the St. Joseph's parishioners, and I always felt that's very unfortunate, but it was part of the times, and we lived, in Sandy Hill. It was a sort of an enclave. I've always left whenever in later years when I'd be going to meetings or something, be driving down, and I'd tell my colleagues, "Oh, pay attention now. We're going to enter Sandy Hill, the sacred space in Ottawa." So I mean, I had a nice heartfelt attachment to the place, but my life was very constricted, and in respect of the fullness of the world. And we had no contact with Protestants. As a matter of fact, we weren't even allowed to go to a Protestant church. But I'm not blaming that on St. Joseph's. That was the Catholic culture of the time.
Yes.
And the culture was very narrow. And it took me, well, I had, moved away when I became a young man, and I had jobs, and I ended up working in the United States for the Sign magazine as a journalist, and they sent me around the world, and I began to travel through Asia, Africa, and Latin America, and I discovered the fullness of humanity. And I discovered that most of the world is non-white, non-Western, and non-Christian, and that I'm in a real minority in global terms. But I had to discover that for myself through experiences, and that, as I said earlier, broke out of the parochial surroundings in which I was brought up. I should be very careful here not to leave the impression that I do not appreciate the surroundings in which I certainly do. I've indicated here that the St. Joseph's Church and the school gave me a foundation on which I based my life, my moral values, and all the things I stand for came about from that grounding. And so when I go back to Ottawa periodically, I go back to Ottawa, and I try to go to the Mass. I try to go to the 9:30 Mass on Sundays at St. Joseph's, because it revives in me the formation that I've spoken of. But my life as a whole has had to be much larger.
Yes. When you were at St. Joe's, do you recall any prominent parishioners or people that you knew that were any examples in the community?
Well, the most prominent person, I suppose, was Paul Martin Sr. He was a senior cabinet minister in the Liberal government of Pearson and perhaps earlier in Celeron when Mr. Celeron was there, and Mackenzie King. Mm-hmm. So I remember Paul Martin is standing outside the church, outside St. Joseph's. When the Mass would be over, people would be out, they'd congregate around. I mean, as I said earlier, it was a sort of a community atmosphere. And Paul Martin would be holding forth. And he was a very gregarious and outgoing man. Well, he's a politician to begin with. He was outgoing, and he wanted to touch everybody. I mean, just to shake hands and give them a greeting. And I kind of teased his son, Paul Martin, whom I got to know very well, and who also, of course, he became prime minister. Paul Martin Sr. was a cabinet minister, but his son Paul became prime minister. So I used to tease Paul Martin Jr. about, are you as good a politician as your father, and reaching out to everybody. But so that was certainly one of the memories I have. I have a modern memory of St. Joseph's too, though. I went there not a few years ago, and there, by this time, Vatican Council, Second Vatican Council had come and gone, and a whole lot of changes were made, and not the least of which was that lay people gave the homily and during the mass, and there, just not only men but women too. So St. Joseph's was quite advanced, and I think now about it, it's quite advanced in relative terms, liturgically speaking. But there one Sunday was Mark Carney. Mark Carney, the famous economist, and he works for the World Bank, and was the governor of the Bank of Canada and the governor of the Bank of England. And there was Mark Carney very humbly giving his homily, and went up to him afterwards, and because he knew who I was, because in the election of 1980, his father, Bob Carney, ran against me in the seat which I was holding in Edmonton South seat in Parliament, and I won the election. But so I kind of teased Mark, and I said, "Well, Mark," I said, "this is when I ran against your father. There was certainly a case where the best man." The best man did not win in that election. I had great respect for his father, but Mark Carney gave a wonderful homily, and he's also accredited to St. Joseph's Church. I don't know whether he still goes. He's now back in Ottawa. Whether he still goes regularly to St. Joseph's, I don't know.
No, I believe he goes to St. Basil's now. He moved to the West End when he came back to Ottawa.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Now, Doug, you've written a lot of books, I believe 26 in total. And just curious as to what prompted you to write books?
Well, that's a hard question to answer. Maybe I felt I had to. My first book, I've written a lot of books in my life, and my first book was on the Vatican Council. I wrote it in 1968. I had been to the Vatican Council. I'd been there virtually every year. I went on for 4 years, the fall season of 4 years. And I was then, by that time I was I had been the founding editor of the Western Catholic Reporter. That's why I went to Edmonton, to be the editor of the Catholic paper. And thus I went over to the Vatican Council, and I became intrigued by the whole process of change in the church, and the new dimension for the church. Instead of being it's just a hierarchical structure, there would be actually a living community in a circular sort of way, called the people of God. And I was very taken by this, and I wrote my first book on that theme. And then I became friends with Bishop Remy DeRoe, one of the great figures in the Catholic Church in Canada. He just died a month or two ago. And DeRoe and I wrote a book together, and then I went on and wrote some other books. But by this time I got into politics, and I was elected to Parliament in 1972. This year is the 50th anniversary of my first election to Parliament. And so I entered a whole new world, new dimensions, and I began to study the processes of development, and then disarmament, and then into nuclear disarmament. And as I would delve deeper into all these fields, I found myself writing a lot, and of course that turned into turned into a number of books and my lectures across Canada, and so it's writing for me has been an outlet, and I wouldn't want to carry this too far, but a certain vocation, I think, to try to express the ideas about fairness and social justice in the world, and what constitutes the agenda for peace, and how human rights and environmental problems and economic and social development and arms control and disarmament all figure into a human security agenda. So that has become, that's been a leitmotif of my books through the years.
That's good. You know, I was amazed at the number of books and that you've written over the years. And your sister would say, we always think it's the last book. We always seem to have another one coming out.
Well, I mean, only the Lord knows. I think I probably have written my last book, but you know, you never know. But it's you know, Terry, when I have to be careful the way I say this. I don't have any great complex, you know, saving the world all by myself. I don't have any of that at all. Yeah. But I do feel that here on Earth, we're all part of God's continuing plan of development of the planet. And to put it mildly, I don't think that God had nuclear weapons in mind when he created the world. No. And so this is an affront to God. The very idea of human beings creating such massive destruction, it's bad enough that we're allowing destruction of the world through climate and warming, global warming, but to deliberately set off attacks that would destroy huge sections of the world is a blasphemy against God. Mm-hmm. And so I feel pretty strongly about these, and these themes marked my political career. And I've been fortunate that I have had a long political career. And I said 50 years ago I was elected to Parliament, but then I went on to become an ambassador at the United Nations, and then later on I was a senator. So it's a rare distinction in Canada for one person to have held those three posts of member of Parliament, ambassador, and senator. And I feel privileged to have been able to participate in Canadian public life through those years. I feel blessed. And it's God who has blessed me. And I mean, I still have my health, my physical and my mental health. So I feel an obligation to continue working, and I do. I'm working every day, and I certainly want to continue to do so as long as I can. Yes. And when I cannot any longer, then that'll be God's decision. So, but you know, we live in a very difficult world, and to put it mildly, very difficult. And so
throughout the last 2 months,
when I've got some the grounding that I had, coming back to your opening questions about St. Joseph's, that has stood me well through the years.
Well, Doug, we're coming to the end. Do you have any final thoughts you'd like to share with us?
Well, I feel a very strong attachment to Pope Francis, and I've met him, you know, 3 or 4 times, and I've been an advisor to the Holy See delegation to the United Nations in New York and then I met him in that capacity when in my work advising the Holy See on their nuclear weapons policies. And I feel for the man because I realize that he's got his enemies in the church and people who are in high places who don't want him because they don't want change. They don't know the curia is wrapped up by it's in itself. And while I love the city of Rome, and I was there just again last November, it was the last time I was there, I don't want a Roman culture permeating the whole Catholic Church. The Catholic Church needs to have its own indigenous culture, wherever it is, and it needs. I mean, Christ is not a singular figure. I mean, it's just who lived somebody in time. I mean, Christ is with us today, and he's universal, and we have to extend the ideas that he promulgated on the Sermon on the Mount. Blessed are the peacemakers, and you know, that's a universal message of the church. And Pope Francis has personalized that message in his outreach. And so I feel strongly that the church needs to modernize in the sense of reaching out more to people in more of a community. And when I go to St. Joseph's, I get a sense of that. I get a feeling for that, and so I congratulate them for the way in which they have in St. Joseph's evolved themselves through the years. But we need all of us to play a role. Not every person can be the Secretary General of the United Nations, and that's not the point. But all of us have a role to play in our own lives, in reaching out, touching people, being aware, communicating, expressing love as a basis. And certainly the older I've gotten, and I guess I would not be considered to be quite old, I suppose, at 90, coming up to 93, the more I am convinced that there's only one real message in the world that will count, that will stay, and that will help us to survive, and that is the message of love. And boy, that's a tough message today to put out in a world that is fearful of change and antagonistic and rejecting a common agenda. So we gotta, I mean, I cannot control this whole thing by myself, Terry. I mean, I have to recognize that I'm only one small person in a great big world. But as long as I'm here, I want my voice to be heard.
Good man. Well, Doug, thank you very much for this very informative interview. It's been a real pleasure to interview you. And thank you, Chris Adam, for being the videographer for this session and the initiator of this video series. Thanks, Doug, and I hope to see you when you come to Ottawa.
Thank you, Terry. I send my best wishes to you and all the parishioners and all your friends, all our friends at St. Joseph's.
Thank you, Doug. Have a good day.